I've never cared much for jewelry. Gold, silver, diamonds, they all look the same to me. Just overpriced rocks people like to show off. My wife, Laura, though, she liked her little luxuries. Nothing crazy, just the occasional bracelet or earrings I'd get her for an anniversary or her birthday. That was the thing. I was the one who always bought them. And since I was the one paying, I knew exactly what she had. Every necklace, every ring, every tiny bit of shine she owned had passed through my hands first. That's why, when she walked into the house one evening with a brand new diamond necklace sparkling against her collarbone, something twisted in my gut. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't some dainty little chain with a charm. No, this was expensive, thick white gold, glistening stones that caught the light every time she moved. A statement piece. I sat in my chair in the living room, pretending to be more interested in the TV than her. But I wasn't listening to a damn thing coming from the screen. My focus was on her, the way she carried herself, the way she touched the necklace like it was something precious. "Nice necklace," I said, keeping my voice casual. She looked up, startled for half a second before she plastered on a bright smile. Her fingers trailed over the stones lightly, as if drawing attention to them without making it obvious. "Oh, this?" she laughed, waving her hand like it was nothing. "Just something I picked up." That's all she said. No mention of where. No mention of when. And most importantly, no mention of how much it cost. I nodded, watching her closely. But I didn't push. Not yet. Laura had never been the type to buy herself extravagant things. Even when she wanted something, she always hesitated, always asked if it was too much before making a decision. And when she did spend money, she always made sure I knew about it, whether it was a new coat or a handbag she'd been eyeing for months. But this was different. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind turning over the details again and again. If she had bought it herself, there would have been a conversation. A small complaint about how she probably shouldn't have spent so much but just had to have it. There would have been a receipt somewhere, a transaction in our bank account, something, but there was nothing. And I hated the way she had brushed it off. The way she acted like it didn't matter, like it was just some cheap little trinket she picked up on a whim. A few days passed, and I started noticing more. First, it was a new bracelet. Thin, delicate, but undeniably expensive. A few days later, a pair of diamond earrings I'd never seen before. Then a gold ring with a tiny row of rubies, subtle, but still worth a hell of a lot more than anything she'd normally wear. I waited. I watched. And then, when I had enough, I checked our accounts, expecting to see some ridiculous charge from a high-end jewelry store. But there was nothing. No big withdrawals. No credit card transactions. Not even a small payment plan. Which meant only one thing. Someone else was paying for them. I didn't need a detective. I didn't need to snoop through her phone. The proof was hanging right there on her neck, wrapped around her wrist, sitting on her damn fingers. She wasn't hiding it. Not exactly. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't care. But I noticed. And I cared. That's when I really started paying attention. The way she started dressing up more. Not just for special occasions, but randomly, like she was putting effort into looking good for no reason. The way she seemed a little too absorbed in her phone, her lips curling up at messages she never let me see. The way she came home late, breezing past my questions with quick, easy answers that never quite explained where she'd been. She wasn't even trying hard to cover her tracks. And maybe that pissed me off more than anything. So one night, when she told me she was going to dinner with a friend, I didn't believe her. I let her get dressed. I let her do her hair, put on her makeup, slip on heels she hadn't worn in months. And when she left, I followed. I kept my distance, trailing her car through the city, my grip tightening around the wheel as she pulled into a parking lot in front of a place I'd never seen her go before. Not a restaurant, not a bar, a jewelry store, a high-end one, the kind that had velvet displays and security guards at the door. She stepped inside, and I parked across the street, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, she came out. But she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, tall, sharp-dressed, maybe mid-30s. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I didn't need to. The way he leaned in close, the way she laughed, the way she let him touch the small of her back when he handed her a small black box. It was all I needed to see. She didn't even look guilty. Didn't check over her shoulder, didn't hesitate, didn't act like someone who knew she was being watched. And the way she smiled at him, it wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't the kind you give to a friend. It was the kind of smile a woman gives to a man when she thinks no one else is watching. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was planning. I sat in my car across the street, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the city noise. It felt like my stomach had dropped out of my body, like gravity had shifted, leaving me weightless in a way that had nothing to do with freedom and everything to do with anger. There she was, my wife, smiling at some other man like he was the center of her damn universe. I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't in denial. I knew what I was looking at. The black velvet box he handed her. I'd seen enough jewelry store commercials to know what was inside. Another gift. Another expensive little token of whatever the hell was going on between them. Laura didn't even hesitate to take it. She laughed, her fingers brushing his as she accepted it. If I had any doubt before, it was gone now. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't some casual friendship. This was my wife with a man who thought he had the right to put his hands on her, to buy her things like she belonged to him. I could have confronted them right then. I could have gotten out of my car, stormed across the street, and punched the guy so hard his teeth rattled. But I didn't. Not yet. Because I needed more. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. So I waited. I watched. They stood there talking for a while, her body language easy, relaxed, too comfortable for two people who weren't intimate. The way she leaned into him, the way he kept sneaking little glances at her, like she was the best thing he'd ever seen. It made my blood boil. Then, finally, they parted. He didn't kiss her, didn't even hug her, but he didn't have to. The way she looked at him before turning away said it all. She got in her car and drove off. I hesitated for maybe half a second before I made my decision. I wasn't done here. I needed to see this man up close. I climbed out of my car, crossing the street with slow, deliberate steps, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got inside. Maybe I'd pretend to be a customer. Maybe I'd just take a good look at him, see the kind of guy who thought he could steal another man's wife. The jewelry store was bright, too polished, too pristine. The kind of place that smelled like money. Glass cases lined the walls, displaying watches that cost more than my truck, diamonds that could pay off someone's mortgage. And standing behind one of those cases, right where Laura had just been, was him. I took him in tall, well-dressed, hair slicked back in a way that made him look like he belonged in some overpriced cologne ad. A salesman, obviously. The type that knew exactly how to charm women, like my wife, into thinking they deserved more than they had. He looked up when I walked in, all professional warmth and polished confidence. "Evening, sir. Looking for something special." I stared at him, my jaw tight. Special? Yeah, I was looking for something real special. But I forced my expression into something neutral. I wasn't here to make a scene. Not yet. Just browsing. I muttered, stepping closer, letting my gaze flick over the case between us. I could feel his eyes on me, studying me the way a salesman sizes up a potential buyer. But I wasn't here to buy. I was here to get a better look at the man who had his hands all over my wife. There was something slick about him, something too smooth. The kind of guy who could talk his way into anything. I bet he was the type to call women darling or sweetheart while sliding a bracelet onto their wrist. The type to pretend he gave a damn about their lives while he was really just waiting for the right moment to slip into their bed. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to figure out exactly what was going on before I blew everything up. After a minute of pretending to browse, I turned on my heel and walked out. Back in my car, I sat for a long time, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I already knew the truth. Now I just needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. The night of lies. When I got home, Laura was already there, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine like she hadn't just spent the evening with another man. She looked up when I walked in, her smile easy, casual. "Hey, babe. How was your day?" I stared at her. Her necklace caught the light, shimmering as she shifted. The same necklace another man had put around her neck. I had to force my voice to stay even. "Fine," she nodded, taking a sip of wine, like she didn't have a single worry in the world, like she wasn't lying right to my face. I wanted to ask her about the box, the one she had accepted so easily, the one that was probably sitting upstairs in her bedroom, waiting to be worn the next time she saw him. But I bit my tongue. If I asked now, she'd just lie. I knew her well enough to know that much. Instead, I sat down across from her, watching the way she tucked her legs under herself, looking every bit the devoted wife who hadn't just spent her evening with someone else. The rage was still there, boiling just beneath the surface. But I wasn't going to let it take over. Not yet, because I had a plan. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I wasn't going to be the fool who let his wife walk all over him while she played house with another man. No, I was going to make sure she felt every bit of the betrayal she was dealing out. And by the time I was done, she'd wish she never put that damn necklace on in the first place. I sat across from Laura, my fingers drumming against the armrest of the couch. She sipped her wine, eyes on the TV, relaxed, oblivious. She had no idea I had followed her. No idea I had watched her take that jewelry from another man's hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. My mind played the scene over and over, like a damn movie stuck on repeat. Her smile, the way her fingers brushed his as she took the black velvet box, the way he looked at her like he owned her. I wanted to grab the glass out of her hand and smash it against the wall. I wanted to rip that necklace from her throat and make her tell me who he was to her. But I knew how this would go if I confronted her now. She'd lie. She'd bat her eyes, give me some half-assed excuse, make me feel like I was the crazy one. Not yet. I needed to let this sit. I needed her to think I suspected nothing. Because when I hit her with the truth, I wanted to see her break. The black velvet box. The next morning, I waited until she was in the shower before I started searching. I moved through the bedroom quietly, knowing exactly what I was looking for. Women were predictable. They had hiding spots, but they weren't exactly Fort Knox. Top dresser drawer? No. Jewelry box? Nothing new there, just the things I had bought her over the years. Nightstand? Bingo. I pulled open the drawer and spotted the small black box immediately, tucked just behind her old paperback novels and a bottle of lotion. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It wasn't from any place cheap. No gaudy department store logo, no tacky branding. Just sleek, matte black, discreet, expensive. The kind of thing a lover would give in secret, not a husband who had nothing to hide. My throat tightened as I flipped it open. Inside sat a bracelet, thin, delicate, covered in tiny diamonds. The kind of thing that didn't scream wealth but whispered it. This wasn't just jewelry. This was intimacy. This was a man looking at my wife and thinking about what would look good wrapped around her wrist as she reached for him in the dark. I clenched my jaw, snapping the box shut. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, my skin hot with anger. But I still wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Not before I made sure she had no way to wriggle out of this. I put the box back exactly where I found it and closed the drawer. I needed to think. A trail of lies. That day, I started paying closer attention. Not just to her, but to everything. Her phone, her schedule, her damn expressions. The first thing I noticed was how often she was busy. Meetings after work, dinner with the girls, running errands that always seemed to take a little too long. The second thing I noticed was the way she checked her phone. She never left it unattended, never set it down without flipping it face down. And when she thought I wasn't looking, she smiled at the screen. A small smile, the kind that wasn't meant for me. The third thing I noticed? She had changed. Not just her schedule, her. She started dressing differently. Little things at first. Nicer blouses, tighter skirts, shoes with taller heels. Makeup when she didn't normally bother. Perfume even when she was just running out for a quick trip. She was trying harder, but not for me. And that pissed me off more than anything. I wasn't some clueless husband who ignored his wife. I noticed. I saw the way she came home late and brushed past me with a distracted kiss. Her mind still somewhere else. I saw the way her hand lingered on that damn necklace, like it meant something more to her than just a pretty piece of jewelry. I watched, and I waited, because I knew she'd slip up eventually. She was getting too comfortable, too reckless, and I was going to be there when it all came crashing down. The breaking point. 2 nights later, she told me she was meeting her friend, Jessica, for dinner. I smiled, nodded, acted like I bought the lie. And the moment she walked out the door, I grabbed my keys and followed. This time, I wasn't just watching. I was hunting. She drove across town, past the restaurants where she actually did meet Jessica sometimes, past the areas where she would have had a reason to be. When she finally pulled into a small, dimly lit parking lot behind a row of high-end shops, I already knew what I was going to see. She parked, got out, and then he appeared. The same damn man from the jewelry store. He was waiting for her by the side entrance of one of the buildings, hands in his pockets, a smirk on his face. She walked right up to him like it was nothing, like she had nothing to hide. And then he kissed her, not just a quick peck, not some chaste, uncertain gesture. He kissed her like he owned her, like she was his. And the worst part? She kissed him back. I sat there in my truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard my vision blurred. I wasn't even breathing. I had been prepared for a lot of things, a lot of possibilities. But seeing her confirm it like this, seeing her melt into him, her hands resting on his chest, her body pressing against his like it was second nature, that was the moment something inside me snapped. The old me, the patient me, the one who had waited, who had held back, he died right then and there. This wasn't going to be some sad, quiet ending where I confronted her in our kitchen, asking why, listening to her bullshit excuses. No, she wanted to play dirty? Then so would I. I wasn't just going to walk away from this like some broken-hearted fool. I was going to ruin them. Both of them. I sat there in my truck, staring through the windshield as my wife, kissed another man like I didn't exist. Like the years we spent together meant nothing. Like I was just some idiot sitting at home while she played pretend with her jewelry store lover. The air inside the cab felt thick, suffocating. My fingers ached from how hard I was gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't thinking straight anymore. Every rational thought had been burned away by the sight of her melting into his arms like he was her world. I wanted to get out of the truck, wanted to storm over there, grab him by his expensive collar, and introduce his face to the pavement. But I knew better. I had to be smart about this, because this wasn't just about catching her in the act. This was about ruining her. And I wasn't about to let anger make me sloppy. Gathering the pieces, I forced myself to stay still, to memorize every detail. How long they stood there. How she laughed, tilting her head in that way she used to do for me. The way he touched her waist like he had every right. They didn't even try to be careful. She hadn't lied about meeting someone. She had just left out the part where it wasn't Jessica. That told me something. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was too stupid to figure it out. She thought she could have both of us, her safe, comfortable life at home, and this other life, dripping in gold and diamonds. And maybe she would have gotten away with it, if she hadn't been so damn reckless. I took out my phone. One photo, then another, a few more for good measure. Laura, smiling up at him like he was the only man in the world. Laura, letting him cup her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek in a way that made my stomach turn. Laura, following him through the side entrance of the building. I stared at the last picture for a long time. They weren't just sneaking around in public. They had a place, a location they had used before, a second life right under my nose. I could almost hear her excuses already. It's not what it looks like. I can explain. It didn't mean anything. I clenched my jaw. She had no idea what was coming. The first cut. I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. The street emptied, the night stretching on. And still I waited. Finally, the door opened. She came out first. Hair a little messier than before. Clothes still neat, but something about the way she smoothed them down made my stomach tighten. He followed a few seconds later, his jacket slung over his shoulder, looking just as smug as before. I took another photo. Then, with deliberate ease, I started my truck and pulled away from the curb. I wasn't going home yet. I had work to do, planting the seeds. The next morning, I was up before Laura. I sat at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee, phone in hand. When she finally came downstairs, her usual morning routine intact. Stretch, yawn, pour herself a cup. She barely even glanced at me. "Morning," she said, her voice easy, casual, like she hadn't spent the night wrapped around someone else. I let my gaze linger on her, waiting for some flicker of guilt, some hesitation, some sign that she knew something was off. Nothing. She kissed my cheek on her way past, like she always did. And that pissed me off more than anything. She really thought she was getting away with it. I finished my coffee in silence, letting her move through her routine without a word. But by the time she left for work, the first part of my plan was already in motion. The jewelry store lover. I had done my research. It didn't take much to find out who he was. His name was Daniel Keller. He wasn't just some jewelry store employee. He owned a damn place. Inherited it from his father. Made a name for himself selling overpriced engagement rings to clueless men who thought a bigger diamond meant a better marriage. He was married once, years ago. Divorced now. No kids. Rich. Charming. A textbook homewrecker. And now he was mine. The first strike. I made my move that afternoon. Walked into his jewelry store like any other customer. The moment I stepped inside, he glanced up from behind the counter. That same fake friendly smile on his face. He didn't recognize me. Of course, he didn't. Why would he? To him, I was just another guy walking in off the street. He had no idea who I was. No idea that I had spent the last 12 hours crafting his downfall. Afternoon, sir, he greeted, voice smooth, practiced. Looking for something special today? I let the words hang for a moment before I answered. Yeah, I said, stepping closer to the glass case. Something real special. I watched his expression, searching for a flicker of recognition. Nothing. I could almost laugh. I leaned in slightly, tapping the glass case. Let me ask you something. What's the most personal piece of jewelry a man can give a woman? His eyes lit up, and I knew exactly what he was going to say before he even opened his mouth. An engagement ring, he said smoothly. A piece that represents commitment, love. I cut him off with a slow nod. Right. That's what I thought. I slipped my phone out of my pocket. And then, with careful precision, I placed it on the glass, screen facing up. His smile wavered, because there, staring back at him, was a photo of him kissing my wife. I saw the exact moment it hit him, the slight shift in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened just a fraction before he smoothed it over. He opened his mouth, but I lifted a hand before he could speak. Don't bother, I said, my voice low. I already know. He swallowed, glancing around the store like he was waiting for someone to save him. No one did. This isn't what you think, he started, in God. If I had $1 for every time I'd heard that line, I'd be rich enough to buy every damn diamond in this store. I smiled. A slow, deliberate thing. I think, I said, pocketing my phone. You're a man who doesn't know when he's fucked. I took a step back, letting my words settle. I'm going to ruin you, I said, keeping my voice calm. Your business, your reputation, your whole damn life. And the best part? You're going to watch it happen. His face paled. He opened his mouth again, but this time, I didn't let him speak. I turned and walked out of the store, leaving him standing there, his perfect little world already beginning to crack. This was just the beginning. By the time I was finished, Daniel Keller wouldn't just regret touching my wife. He'd regret ever meeting her. I walked out of that jewelry store with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was something colder, sharper, a fire that burned low and steady, refusing to die out. I wasn't the type of man to sit back and let someone walk all over me. I wasn't the type to cry into my beer, asking where I went wrong. No, I was the type of man who made damn sure the people who crossed me paid for it. And Daniel Keller? That smug bastard had just stepped onto the tracks of a train he never saw coming. The first move. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove around, letting my mind work through every possible angle. Keller had money, influence, probably had a few powerful friends, the kind who would cover for him if this got messy. But there was one thing men like him couldn't survive: scandal. His business thrived on trust. Men came to him for engagement rings, wedding bands, anniversary gifts. Women dreamed about walking into a store and walking out with something that meant forever. What do you think happens when people find out the man behind the glass counter is screwing another man's wife? I didn't even have to lie. All I had to do was expose him. And I had everything I needed. The photos, the texts I pulled from Laura's cloud backup, messages that made my blood boil just reading them. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning a future with him. Joking about how I'd never figure it out, saying how easy it was to keep me in the dark. I read those messages a dozen times, letting every word sink into my bones. She thought she was smarter than me. That was her first mistake. The setup. The next morning, I got to work. First, I created a new email account. Something anonymous, something untraceable. Then, I wrote an email. Subject: the man selling you love is sleeping with your wives. I kept it simple, straight to the point. Attached the photos, a few screenshots of their messages, a location, dates. Then I made a list. Local news outlets, wedding blogs, social media influencers who made their money off relationship advice. Hell, even the Better Business Bureau. And then, just for good measure, I added a few of his competitors. Jewelers who would love nothing more than to watch his empire burn. And with one click, I sent it all out. The fuse was lit. Now, all I had to do was wait for the explosion. The storm begins. By noon, it had started. The first article popped up on a small local gossip site, just a tiny spark in a sea of headlines. By evening, it had spread. People started talking. The photos made their rounds. Customers left angry reviews on his business page, demanding refunds, calling him a fraud. And the best part? Laura still had no idea. She came home that night, acting like everything was normal. Kicked off her heels, poured herself a glass of wine, and sat down on the couch like she didn't have a damn care in the world. But I was watching the news on my phone, watching as the world she built on lies started to crack. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The second strike. The next day, I went to see Keller again. This time, I didn't walk in like a customer. I walked in like a man who had come to watch the fire spread. The moment I stepped inside, I knew the damage had already begun. The store was nearly empty. One employee was frantically typing on their phone behind the counter, probably reading the same headlines I had sent out into the world. And Keller? I spotted him in his office through the glass door, pacing like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. I waited, watched, and then, after a minute, I knocked once on the glass. He turned, and the moment his eyes landed on me, I saw it. Panic. The kind that settles deep in your chest when you realize you're not in control anymore. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Keller set his phone down, straightening his tie like that would somehow fix the mess he was in. "What the hell do you want?" he snapped. I leaned against the desk, taking my time. "Looks like you've had a rough day," I said casually. His jaw clenched. "You think this is funny?" I tilted my head, pretending to think about it. "A little." His face darkened. "You did this." "Did what?" I asked, spreading my hands. "I didn't do anything, Keller. Just shared a few interesting photos with the right people. You did the rest all on your own." He exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. "Listen," he started, voice low, controlled. "We can fix this." I almost laughed. "Fix this?" I echoed. "You think there's a fix for this?" He swallowed, probably running through every possible way he could make this go away. "How much do you want?" he finally asked. And there it was. The offer. The thing men like him always relied on, money. I smiled, slow and sharp. "You think I want your money?" I asked. "You think I need some kind of payout to walk away from this?" I leaned in just a little, just enough to watch him shift uncomfortably. "This isn't about money, Keller," I said. "This is about you learning what it feels like to lose." He was breathing heavily now, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't understand," he said. "Laura, she—" I cut him off with a shake of my head. "I don't give a damn what she told you. You knew she was married. You knew." He opened his mouth like he was going to argue, but then, as if realizing there was no winning here, he shut it. I let the silence stretch between us before I spoke again. "You made two mistakes," I said. "The first was thinking you could take something from me without consequences." Keller's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "And the second?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I smiled again. "The second," I said, "was thinking I'd let you walk away from this in one piece." I turned and walked out of his office without another word. I wasn't finished yet. Keller had taken something from me, and now I was going to take everything from him. I walked out of Keller's jewelry store with the same sense of satisfaction a man gets after watching a snake squirm under his boot. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Keller thought he could buy his way out of this mess. He thought throwing money at the problem would make it go away. That's how men like him worked. They built their lives on the idea that they were untouchable. that they could do whatever the hell they wanted and never face the consequences. I was about to teach him a lesson. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about destruction. I want to watch him lose everything. His business, his reputation, his peace of mind. I wanted to see his life crumble the way he had tried to destroy mine. And I wasn't going to stop until there was nothing left of him. The fire spreads. By the time I got back to my truck, the first real explosion had already gone off. I had set the trap. Now all I had to do was watch him walk into it. I opened my phone and checked the latest updates. The story had spread like wildfire. Keller's name was everywhere now. Local jeweler caught in affair scandal. Customers speak out. Luxury engagement ring business owner exposed. Secret romance with married woman. Would you buy a wedding ring from this man? There were hundreds of comments under the articles, each one worse than the last. This guy helped me pick out a ring for my wife last year. Now I wonder if he was sleeping with someone else's while doing it. Disgusting. This is why you don't trust smooth-talking salesmen. They'll sell you a lie and steal your wife in the same breath. Hope this asshole loses everything. People were pissed. And the best part? His store's Google reviews had started tanking. One-star ratings poured in from people who had never even set foot inside. Wouldn't trust this guy to sell me a cubic zirconia, let alone a real diamond. If you want a ring and a broken marriage, shop here. Maybe he should sell apology gifts instead. Seems like he'd be good at that. It was a beautiful sight. I had set the wheels in motion, and now there was no stopping them. Laura's realization. I got home that evening calm, collected. I had spent the whole drive imagining how this would play out. Laura had no idea what was happening yet, but she was about to find out. She was already in the kitchen when I walked in, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up and smiled, completely oblivious. "Hey," she said, her voice as smooth as ever. "How was your day?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman standing in front of me had been my wife for years. I had trusted her, loved her, given her everything. And now she was nothing to me. I let the moment stretch, waiting to see if she'd notice the tension in the air, if she'd pick up on the fact that something was off. She didn't. She just turned away, swirling the wine in her glass like she didn't have a single worry in the world. It almost made me laugh. She thought she had gotten away with it. She had no idea that, at that very moment, the man she had thrown her marriage away for was burning. "Busy day?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She hummed, taking a sip. "Yeah, work was a nightmare. Jessica called. She wants to plan a trip next month, by the way. Maybe a weekend away? Just the two of us." Jessica. Her alibi. I bit back a smirk. "Sounds nice," I said. "Did you see the news today?" She frowned. "The news?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and slid it across the counter. She hesitated, then set down her wine and picked it up. And then she went pale. I watched her eyes move over the headline. The photos. The comments sections. She scrolled, her hand gripping the edge of the counter, her breathing going shallow. She knew. She knew exactly what this was. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed, waiting for the moment she broke. Finally, she looked up at me. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Because what the hell do you say when you realize your whole world is about to collapse? I let the silence hang between us for a long time. Then, finally I spoke. "You want to tell me how your name hasn't come up yet?" She swallowed. Hard. I don't know what. "Don't." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me. Not now." She closed her eyes for a second, like she was trying to steady herself. Then, she did exactly what I expected her to do. She lied. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed. Actually laughed. That was the best she could come up with? I pushed away from the wall, stepping closer. "No," I said, "because it looks like my wife's been screwing a man who just lost his entire reputation." She flinched. She started, but I held up a hand. "Save it," I said, shaking my head. "I already know everything." Her eyes darted to the phone again, then back to me. She was scrambling, trying to figure out what to say. I watched her like a predator watching prey. And then, softly, I delivered the final blow. "I hope he was worth it," I said, "because you just lost everything." The end of Laura Keller. I left her standing there. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need her fake apologies. I had already moved past her, because the truth was Laura wasn't important anymore. She had thrown herself away the moment she let another man touch her. And now, she had to live with the consequences. I walked out of the house, breathing in the cool night air. Behind me, I could still hear her shaky breaths, the way she tried, and failed, to pull herself together. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had one last thing to do. One last piece of this game to finish. Because Daniel Keller had been exposed. Laura had been left in the wreckage. But I was just getting started. I left Laura standing there in the kitchen, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her world had shattered around her, and for the first time, she had no control over the damage. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot, because there was still one last piece left to play. Daniel Keller had taken something from me. Now, it was time to take everything from him. The collapse of a king. I drove straight to his store, not bothering to check if it was still open. I didn't need to walk inside. I had already seen the damage from the outside. The once pristine jewelry shop was empty. The blinds were drawn halfway down, and through the glass, I could see Keller pacing inside, his phone pressed to his ear. I pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine, watching him. Even from here, I could see the stress written all over his face. His tie was loosened, his hair a little messier than usual. The cocky bastard who had kissed my wife like I didn't exist was gone. Now, he just looked like a man who was losing everything. I let him sweat for a few minutes before I finally stepped out of the truck. The moment I walked up to the door, his eyes met mine through the glass. He froze. I gave him a slow, deliberate smile. Then I knocked. He hesitated, looked around, like he was debating whether to pretend he wasn't there. But I waited, and eventually, he unlocked the door. The second I stepped inside, I could feel the tension in the air. "What the hell do you want?" he snapped, his voice raw with exhaustion. I let the door close behind me, taking my time. "Thought I'd check in," I said. "See how you're holding up." His jaw clenched. "You think this is funny?" I tilted my head. "A little." He ran a hand through his hair, his other hand tightening into a fist. "You ruined me," he said. I smiled. "No, you ruined you." He exhaled sharply, eyes wild. "You set me up. You." I cut him off with a chuckle. "I didn't make you sleep with my wife, Keller. You did that all on your own." His nostrils flared. "She came to me," he spat. "She was already done with you. She just didn't know how to tell you." My smile didn't waver, because I wanted him to say that. I wanted him to think he had some kind of power left. "That right?" I asked, stepping closer. "She tell you that before, or after you put a bracelet on her wrist?" He didn't answer. I laughed softly. "Here's the thing, Keller. You didn't just screw my wife. You screwed yourself." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "What? You think you can destroy my entire business over a couple of pictures?" I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tossed it onto the glass counter between us. He frowned, glancing down at it. Then he picked it up, his fingers hesitating before he tapped the screen. His face drained of color. Because this time, it wasn't just photos. It was everything. Bank records, messages, transactions, a full digital trail of the gifts he had showered Laura with. Proof that he had used business accounts to buy her jewelry, to fund her little shopping trips, to finance their affair. I had dug deep, and what I found, it wasn't just an affair anymore. It was fraud. He swallowed hard, scrolling through the files, his breath coming quicker. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged. "Doesn't matter." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with something that almost resembled fear. "I can fix this," he said. "I can." "No," I cut him off. "You can't." I picked my phone back up and tucked it into my pocket. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to shut this place down. Permanently." His mouth opened, but I held up a hand. "You're going to sell everything. At a loss, if you have to. You're going to take that nice little nest egg you've got stashed away and disappear." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And if you don't," I leaned in. "That file? It goes straight to the IRS, to the state, to every damn regulatory office that would love to take a closer look at your business records." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "You'll lose more than your store, Keller," I said, my voice quiet but sharp. "You'll lose everything." He was shaking now, not visibly, but enough that I could see it in the way his fingers twitched, the way his breathing hitched. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew he had no way out. After a long, tense moment, he finally exhaled. His shoulders slumped. "You son of a bitch," he muttered. I grinned. "That's what they tell me." And with that, I turned and walked out. The aftermath. The next day, Daniel Keller's store shut its doors. The news didn't report it as anything major, just another business closing for renovations. But I knew better. A week later, his property was listed for sale. 2 weeks after that, he was gone. Vanished. No word. No statement. No attempt to fight back. Just gone. Laura? She tried. For days, she tried to talk to me. Apologize. Beg. Cry. But I didn't listen. I didn't even argue with her. I just moved on, because Laura had already lost me the second she let another man touch her. She just didn't realize it until now. She left a few weeks later. Packed her bags. I didn't stop her. She had made her choices. And now, she had to live with them. The end of the story. I wasn't the same man I had been before this all started. And honestly, that was a good thing. I had seen what betrayal looked like up close. I had learned what people were capable of. But most of all, I had learned how to win. Because in the end, that's exactly what I did. I didn't just walk away from this. I walked away on top. And that was worth every second of the battle.